We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. Chapter 3. A change was coming, and nobody knew it but me. Constance suspected, perhaps. I noticed that she stood occasionally in her garden and looked not down at the plants she was tending, and not back at our house, but outward, toward the trees which hid the fence. And sometimes she looked long and curiously down the length of the driveway, as though wondering how it would feel to walk along it to the gates. I watched her. On Saturday morning, after Helen Clark had come to tea, Constance looked at the driveway 3 times. Uncle Julian was not well on Saturday morning after tiring himself at tea, and stayed in his bed in his warm room next to the kitchen, looking out of the window beside his pillow, calling now and then to make Constance notice him. Even Jonas was fretful. He was running up a storm, as our mother used to say, and could not sleep quietly. All during those days when the change was coming, Jonas stayed restless. From a deep sleep, he would start suddenly, lifting his head as though listening, and then on his feet and moving in one quick ripple. He ran up the stairs and across the beds and around the doors, in and out, then down the stairs and across the hall and over the chair in the dining room and around the table and through the kitchen and out into the garden, where he would slow, sauntering, then pause to lick a paw and flick an ear and take a look at the day. At night, we could hear him running, feel him cross our feet as we lay in bed, running up a storm. All the omens spoke of change. I woke up on Saturday morning and thought I heard them calling me. They want me to get up, I thought, before I came fully awake and remembered that they were dead. Constance never called me to wake up. When I dressed and came downstairs that morning, she was waiting to make my breakfast, and I told her, I thought I heard them calling me this morning. Hurry with your breakfast, she said. It's another lovely day. After breakfast, on the good mornings when I did not have to go into the village, always on Wednesday mornings, I went around the fence. It was necessary for me to check constantly to be sure that the wires were not broken and the gates were securely locked. I could make the repairs myself, winding the wire back together where it had torn, tightening loose strands. And it was a pleasure to know every Wednesday morning that we were safe for another week. On Sunday mornings, I examined my safeguards, the box of silver dollars I had buried by the creek, and the doll buried in the long field, and the book nailed to the tree in the pine woods. So long as they were there, where I put them, nothing could get in to harm us. I had always buried things, even when I was small. I remember that once I quartered the long field and buried something in each quarter to make the grass grow higher as I grew taller, so I would always be able to hide there. I once buried 6 blue marbles in the creek bed to make the river beyond run dry. Here is a treasure for you to bury, Constance used to say to me when I was small, giving me a penny or a bright ribbon. I had buried all my baby teeth as they came out one by one, and perhaps someday they would grow as dragons. All our land was enriched with my treasures, buried in it, thickly inhabited just below the surface with my marbles and my teeth and my colored stones, all perhaps turned to jewels by now, held together under the ground in a powerful taut web which never loosened, but held fast to guard us. On Tuesdays and Fridays, I went into the village, and on Thursday, which was my most powerful day, I went into the big attic and dressed in their clothes. Mondays we neatened the house, Constance and I, going into every room with mops and dustcloths, carefully setting the little things back after we had dusted, never altering the perfect line of our mother's tortoiseshell comb. Every spring we washed and polished the house for another year. But on Mondays we neatened. Very little dust fell in their rooms, but even that could not be permitted to stay. Sometimes Constance tried to neaten Uncle Julian's room, but Uncle Julian disliked being disturbed and kept his things in their own places. And Constance had to be content with washing his medicine glasses and changing his bed. I was not allowed in Uncle Julian's room. On Saturday mornings, I helped Constance. I was not allowed to handle knives, but when she worked in the garden, I cared for her tools, keeping them bright and clean. And I carried great baskets of flowers, sometimes, or vegetables, which Constance picked to make into food. The entire cellar of our house was filled with food. All the Blackwood women had made food and had taken pride in adding to the great supply of food in our cellar. There were jars of jams made by great-grandmothers, labels in thin, pale writing, almost unreadable by now, and pickles made by great-aunts, and vegetables put up by our grandmother, and even our mother had left behind her 6 jars of apple jelly. Constance had worked all her life at adding to the food in the cellar, and her rows and rows of jars were easily the handsomest, and shone among the others. "You bury the food the way I bury treasure," I told her sometimes, and she answered me once. "The food comes from the ground and can't be permitted to stay there and rot. Something has to be done with it." Old Blackwood women had taken the food that came from the ground and preserved it, and the deeply colored rows of jellies and pickles and bottled vegetables and fruit, maroon and amber and dark rich green, stood side by side in our cellar and would stay there forever. A poem by the Blackwood women. Each year, Constance and Uncle Julian and I had jam or preserve or pickle that Constance had made, but we never touched what belonged to the others. Constance said it would kill us if we ate it. This Saturday morning, I had apricot jam on my toast, and I thought of Constance making it and putting it away carefully for me to eat on some bright morning, never dreaming that a change would be coming before the jar was finished. "Lazy Merricat," Constance said to me. "Stop dreaming over your toast. I want you in the garden on this lovely day." She was arranging Uncle Julian's tray, putting his hot milk into a jug painted with yellow daisies, and trimming his toast so it would be tiny and hot and square. If anything looked large or difficult to eat, Uncle Julian would leave it on the plate. Constance always took Uncle Julian's tray to him in the morning because he slept painfully and sometimes lay awake in the darkness, waiting for the first light and the comfort of Constance with his tray. Some nights, when his heart hurt him badly, he might take one more pill than usual, and then lie all morning drowsy and dull, unwilling to sip from his hot milk, but wanting to know that Constance was busy in the kitchen next door to his bedroom, or in the garden, where he could see her from his pillow. On his very good morning, she brought him into the kitchen for his breakfast, and he would sit at his old desk in the corner, spilling crumbs among his notes, studying his papers while he ate. "If I am spared," he always said to Constance, "I will write the book myself. If not, see that my notes are entrusted to some worthy cynic who will not be too concerned with the truth." I wanted to be kinder to Uncle Julian, so this morning I hoped he would enjoy his breakfast and later come out into the garden in his wheelchair and sit in the sun. Maybe there will be a tulip open today, I said, looking out through the open kitchen door into the bright sunlight. Not until tomorrow, I think, said Constance, who always knew. Wear your boots if you wander today. It will still be quite wet in the woods. There's a change coming, I said. It's spring, silly, she said, and took up Uncle Julian's tray. Don't run off while I'm gone. There's work to be done. She opened Uncle Julian's door, and I heard her say good morning to him. When he said good morning back, his voice was old, and I knew he was not well. Constance would have to stay near him all day. Is your father home yet, child? He asked her. No, not today, Constance said. Let me get your other pillow. It's a lovely day. He's a busy man, Uncle Julian said. Bring me a pencil, my dear. I want to make a note of that. He's a very busy man. Take some hot milk. It will make you warm. You're not Dorothy. You're my niece, Constance. Drink. Good morning, Constance. Good morning, Uncle Julian. I decided that I would choose 3 powerful words. Words of strong protection. And so long as these great words were never spoken aloud, no change would come. I wrote the first word, melody, in the apricot jam on my toast with the handle of a spoon, and then put the toast in my mouth and ate it very quickly. I was 1/3 safe. Constance came out of Uncle Julian's room carrying the tray. He's not well this morning, she said. He left most of his breakfast and he's very tired. If I had a winged horse, I could fly him to the moon and he would be more comfortable there. Later I'll take him out into the sunshine and perhaps make him a little eggnog. Everything's safe on the moon. She looked at me distantly. Dandelion greens, she said, and radishes. I thought of working in the vegetable garden this morning, but I don't want to leave Uncle Julian. I hope that the carrots... She tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. Rhubarb, she said. I carried my breakfast dishes over to the sink and set them down. I was deciding on my second magic word, which I thought might very well be Gloucester. It was strong, and I thought it would do, although Uncle Julian might take it into his head to say almost anything, and no word was truly safe when Uncle Julian was talking. Why not make a pie for Uncle Julian? Constance smiled. You mean, why not make a pie for Merricat? Shall I make a rhubarb pie? Jonas and I dislike rhubarb. But it has the prettiest colors of all. Nothing is so pretty on the shelves as rhubarb jam. Make it for the shelves, then. Make me a dandelion pie. Silly Merricat, Constance said. She was wearing her blue dress. The sunlight was patterned on the kitchen floor, and color was beginning to show in the garden outside. Jonas sat on the step, washing, and Constance began to sing as she turned to wash the dishes. I was 2/3 safe, with only one magic word to find. Later, Uncle Julian still slept, and Constance thought to take 5 minutes and run down to the vegetable garden to gather what she could. I sat at the kitchen table listening for Uncle Julian, so I could call Constance if he awakened. But when she came back, he was still quiet. I ate tiny, sweet, raw carrots while Constance washed the vegetables and put them away. We will have a spring salad, she said. We eat the year away. We eat the spring and the summer and the fall. We wait for something to grow, and then we eat it. Silly Mary Cat, Constance said. At 20 minutes after 11, by the kitchen clock, she took off her apron, glanced in at Uncle Julian, and went, as she always did, upstairs to her room to wait until I called her. I went to the front door and unlocked it and opened it just as the doctor's car turned into the drive. He was in a hurry always, and he stopped his car quickly and ran up the steps. "Good morning, Miss Blackwood," he said, going past me and down the hall. And by the time he had reached the kitchen, he had his coat off and was ready to put it over the back of one of the kitchen chairs. He went directly to Uncle Julian's room without a glance at me or at the kitchen. And then, when he opened Uncle Julian's door, he was suddenly still and gentle. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice easy. "How are things today?" "Where's the old fool?" Uncle Julian said, as he always did. "Why didn't Jack Mason come?" Dr. Mason was the one Constance called the night they all died. "Dr. Mason couldn't make it today," the doctor said, as he always did. "I'm Dr. Levy. I've come to see you instead." "Rather have Jack Mason." "I'll do the best I can." "Mr. Blackwood," the doctor said, "it is a pleasure to have you as a patient." He closed the door very quietly. I thought of using digitalis as my third magic word, but it was too easy for someone to say. And at last I decided on Pegasus. I took a glass from the cabinet and said the word very distinctly into the glass, then filled it with water and drank. Uncle Julian's door opened, and the doctor stood in the doorway for a minute. "Remember now," he said, "and I'll see you next Saturday." "Quack," Uncle Julian said. The doctor turned, smiling, and then the smile disappeared, and he began to hurry again. He took up his coat and went off down the hall. I followed him, and by the time I came to the front door, he was already going down the steps. "Goodbye, Miss Blackwood," he said, not turning around, and got into his car and started at once, going faster and faster until he reached the gates and turned onto the highway. I locked the front door and went to the front of the stairs. "Constance," I called. "Coming," she said from the upstairs. "Coming, Mary Cat." Uncle Julian was better later in the day and sat out in the warm afternoon sun, hands folded in his lap, half dreaming. I lay near him on the marble bench our mother had liked to sit on, and Constance knelt in the dirt, both hands buried as though she were growing, kneading the dirt and turning it, touching the plants on their roots. "It was a fine morning," Uncle Julian said, his voice going on and on. "A fine, bright morning, and none of them knew it was their last. She was downstairs first. My niece, Constance. I woke up and heard her moving in the kitchen. I slept upstairs then. I could still go upstairs. And I slept with my wife in our room, and I thought, this is a fine morning, never dreaming then that it was their last. Then I heard my nephew. No, it was my brother. My brother came downstairs first, after Constance. I heard him whistling." "Constance?" "Yes?" "What was the tune my brother used to whistle, and always off-key?" Constance thought, her hands in the ground, and hummed softly, and I shivered. "Of course, I never had a head for music. I could remember what people looked like and what they said and what they did, but I could never remember what they sang. It was my brother who came downstairs after Constance, never caring, of course, if he woke people with his noise and his whistling, never thinking that perhaps I might still be asleep, although as it happened I was already awake." Uncle Julian sighed and lifted his head to look curiously once around the garden. He never knew it was his last morning on earth. He might have been quieter, I think, if he did know. I heard him in the kitchen with Constance, and I said to my wife, she was awake too, his noise had wakened her. I said to my wife, you had better get dressed. We live here with my brother and his wife, after all, and we must remember to show them that we are friendly and eager to help out wherever we can. Dress and go down to Constance in the kitchen. She did as she was told. Our wives always did as they were told, although my sister-in-law lay in bed late that morning. Perhaps she had had a premonition and wanted to take her earthly rest while she could. I heard them all. I heard the boy go downstairs. I thought of dressing. Constance? Yes, Uncle Julian? I could still dress myself in those days, you know, although that was the last day. I could still walk around by myself and dress myself and feed myself, and I had no pain. I slept well in those days, as a strong man should. I was not young, but I was strong, and I slept well, and I could still dress myself. Would you like a rug over your knees? No, my dear, I thank you. You've been a good niece to me, although there are some grounds for supposing you an undutiful daughter. My sister-in-law came downstairs before I did. We had pancakes for breakfast, tiny, thin, hot pancakes, and my brother had 2 fried eggs, and my wife, although I did not encourage her to eat heavily since we were living with my brother, took largely of sausage. Homemade sausage, made by Constance. Constance? Yes, Uncle Julian. I think if I had known it was her last breakfast, I would have permitted her more sausage. I am surprised now I think of it that no one suspected it was their last morning. They might not have grudged my wife more sausage then. My brother sometimes remarked upon what we ate, my wife and I. He was just a man and never stinted his food so long as we did not take too much. He watched my wife take sausage that morning, Constance. I saw him watching her. We took a little enough from him, Constance. He had pancakes and fried eggs and sausage, but I felt that he was going to speak to my wife. The boy ate hugely. I am pleased that the breakfast was particularly good that day. I could make you sausage next week, Uncle Julian. I think homemade sausage would not disagree with you, if you had very little. My brother never grudged our food if we did not take too much. My wife helped to wash the dishes. I was very grateful to her. She might have done more, I think now. She entertained my sister-in-law, and she saw to our clothes, and she helped with the dishes in the mornings, but I believe that my brother thought that she might have done more. He went off after breakfast to see a man on business. He wanted an arbor built. It was his plan to start a grape arbor. I am sorry about that. We might now be eating jam from our own grapes. I was always better able to chat after he was gone. I recall that I entertained the ladies that morning, and we sat here in the garden. We talked about music. My wife was quite musical, though she never learned to play. My sister-in-law had a delicate touch. It was always said of her that she had a delicate touch. And she played in the evenings, usually. Not that evening, of course. She was not able to play that evening. In the morning, we thought she would play in the evening as usual. Do you recall that I was very entertaining in the garden that morning, Constance? I was weeding the vegetables, Constance said. I could hear you all laughing. I was quite entertaining. I am happy for that now. He was quiet for a minute, folding and refolding his hands. I wanted to be kinder to him, but I could not fold his hands for him, and there was nothing I could bring him, so I lay still and listened to him talk. Constance frowned, staring at a leaf, and the shadows moved softly across the lawn. The boy was off somewhere, Uncle Julian said at last, in his sad old voice. The boy had gone off somewhere. Was he fishing, Constance? He was climbing the chestnut tree. I remember, of course. I remember all of it very clearly, my dear, and I have it all down in my notes. It was the last morning of all, and I would not like to forget. He was climbing the chestnut tree, shouting down to us from very high in the tree and dropping twigs until my sister-in-law spoke sharply to him. She disliked the twigs falling into her hair. And my wife disliked it too, although she would never have been the first to speak. I think my wife was civil to your mother, Constance. I would hate to think not. We lived in our brother's house and ate his food. I know my brother was home for lunch. We had a rare bit, Constance said. I had been working with the vegetables all morning, and I had to make something quickly for lunch.
It was a rare bit we had. I have often wondered why the arsenic was never put into the rare bit. It is an interesting point, and one I shall bring out forcefully in my book. Why was the arsenic not put into the rare bit? They would have lost some hours of life on that last day, but it all would have been over with that much sooner. Constance, if there's one dish you prepare which I strongly dislike, it is a rare bit. I never cared for rare bit.
I know, Uncle Julian. I never serve it to you.
It would have been most suitable for the arsenic. I had a salad instead, I recall. There was an apple pudding for dessert, left over from the night before.
The sun is going down. Constance rose and brushed the dirt from her hands. You'll be chilly unless I take you indoors.
It would have been far more suitable in the rare bit, Constance. Odd that the point was never brought up at the time. Arsenic is tasteless, you know. Although, I swear, a rare bit is not. Where am I going?
You are going indoors. You will rest in your room for an hour until your dinner. And after dinner, I will play for you, if you like.
I cannot afford the time, my dear. I have 1,000 details to remember and note down, and not a minute to waste. I would hate to lose any small thing from their last day. My book must be complete. I think, on the whole, it was a pleasant day for all of them. And, of course, it is much better that they never supposed it was to be their last. I think I am chilly, Constance.
You will be tucked away in your room in a minute. I came up slowly behind them, unwilling to leave the darkening garden. Jonas came after me, moving toward the light in the house. When Jonas and I came inside, Constance was just closing the door to Uncle Julian's room, and she smiled at me. He's practically asleep already, she said softly. When I'm as old as Uncle Julian, will you take care of me? I asked her. If I'm still around, she said, and I was chilled. I sat in my corner, holding Jonas, and watched her move quickly and silently around our bright kitchen. In a few minutes, she would ask me to set the table for the three of us in the dining room. And then after dinner, it would be night, and we would sit warmly together in the kitchen, where we were guarded by the house, and no one from outside could see so much as a light. Chapter 4. On Sunday morning, the change was one day nearer. I was resolute about not thinking my 3 magic words, and would not let them into my mind, but the air of change was so strong that there was no avoiding it. Change lay over the stairs and the kitchen and the garden like fog. I would not forget my magic words. They were Melody, Gloucester, Pegasus, but I refused to let them into my mind. The weather was uneasy on Sunday morning, and I thought that perhaps Jonas would succeed after all in running up a storm. The sun shone into the kitchen, but there were clouds moving quickly across the sky, and a sharp little breeze that came in and out of the kitchen while I had my breakfast. Wear your boots if you wander today, Constance told me. I don't expect that Uncle Julian will sit outdoors today. It will be far too cool for him. Pure spring weather, Constance said, and smiled out at her garden. I love you, Constance, I said. I love you too, silly Merricat. Is Uncle Julian better? I don't think so. He had his tray while you were still asleep, and I thought he seemed very tired. He said he had an extra pill during the night. I think perhaps he is getting worse. Are you worried about him? Yes, very. Will he die? Do you know what he said to me this morning? Constance turned, leaning against the sink, and looked at me with sadness. He thought I was Aunt Dorothy. And he held my hand and said it's terrible to be old and just lie here wondering when it will happen. He almost frightened me. You should have let me take him to the moon, I said. I gave him his hot milk, and then he remembered who I was. I thought that Uncle Julian was probably really very happy with both Constance and Aunt Dorothy to take care of him. And I told myself that long, thin things would remind me to be kinder to Uncle Julian. This was to be a day of long, thin things, since there had already been a hair in my toothbrush, and a fragment of string was caught on the side of my chair, and I could see a splinter broken off the back step. Make him a little pudding, I said. Perhaps I will. She took out the long, thin slicing knife and set it on the sink. Or a cup of cocoa and dumplings with his chicken tonight. Do you need me? No, my Merricat, run along and wear your boots. The day outside was full of changing light, and Jonas danced in and out of the shadows as he followed me. When I ran, Jonas ran, and when I stopped and stood still, he stopped and glanced at me and then went briskly off in another direction, as though we were not acquainted. And then he sat down and waited for me to run again. We were going to the long field, which today looked like an ocean, although I had never seen an ocean. The grass was moving in the breeze, and the cloud shadows passed back and forth, and the trees in the distance moved. Jonas disappeared into the grass, which was tall enough for me to touch with my hands while I walked. And he made small, crooked movements of his own. For a minute, the grass would all bend together under the breeze, and then there would be a hurrying pattern across it where Jonas was running. I started at one corner and walked diagonally across the long field toward the opposite corner. And in the middle, I came directly to the rock, covering the spot where the doll was buried. I could always find it, although much of my buried treasure was forever lost. The rock was undisturbed, and so the doll was safe. I was walking on buried treasure, I thought, with the grass brushing against my hands, and nothing around me but the reach of the long field, with the grass blowing and the pine woods at the end. Behind me was the house, and far off to my left, hidden by trees and almost out of sight, was the wire fence our father had built to keep people out. When I left the long field, I went between the 4 apple trees we called our orchard and along the path toward the creek. My box of silver dollars buried by the creek was safe. Near the creek, well hidden, was one of my hiding places, which I had made carefully and used often. I had torn away 2 or 3 low bushes and smoothed the ground. All around were more bushes and tree branches, and the entrance was covered by a branch which almost touched the ground. It was not really necessary to be so secret, since no one ever came looking for me here, but I liked to lie inside with Jonas and know that I could never be found. I used leaves and branches for a bed, and Constance had given me a blanket. The trees around and overhead were so thick that it was always dry inside, and on Sunday morning I lay there with Jonas, listening to his stories. All cat stories start with the statement, "My mother, who was the first cat, told me this," and I lay with my head close to Jonas and listened. There was no change coming, I thought here, only spring. I was wrong to be so frightened. The day would get warmer, and Uncle Julian would sit in the sun, and Constance would laugh when she worked in the garden, and it would always be the same. Jonas went on, and then we sang, and then we sang. And the leaves moved overhead, and it would always be the same. I found a nest of baby snakes near the creek and killed them all. I dislike snakes, and Constance had never asked me not to. I was on my way back to the house when I found a very bad omen, one of the worst. My book, nailed to the tree in the pine woods, had fallen down. I decided that the nail had rusted away,
And the book, it was a little notebook of our father's where he used to record the names of people who owed him money and people who ought, he thought, to do favors for him. It was useless now as protection. I had wrapped it very thoroughly in heavy paper before nailing it to the tree, but the nail had rusted and it had fallen. I thought I'd better destroy it in case it was now actively bad, and bring something else out for the tree, perhaps a scarf of our mother's or a glove. It was really too late, although I did not know it then. He was already on his way to the house. By the time I found the book, he had probably already left his suitcase in the post office and was asking directions. All Jonas and I knew then was that we were hungry, and we ran back to the house and came with the breeze into the kitchen. "Did you really forget your boots?" Constance said. She tried to frown and then laughed. Silly Merricat. "Jonas had no boots. It's a wonderful day. Perhaps tomorrow we'll go to gather mushrooms. Jonas and I are hungry today." By then, he was already walking through the village toward the Black Rock, with all of them watching him and wondering and whispering as he passed. It was the last of our slow, lovely days, although, as Uncle Julian would have pointed out, we never suspected it then. Constance and I had lunch, giggling, and never knowing that while we were happy, he was trying the locked gate and peering down the path and wandering the woods, shut out for a time by our father's fence. The rain started while we sat in the kitchen, and we left the kitchen door open so we could watch the rain slanting past the doorway and washing the garden. Constance was pleased, the way any good gardener is pleased with rain. "We'll see color out there soon," she said. "We'll always be here together, won't we, Constance?" "Don't you ever want to leave here, Mary Kat?" "Where could we go?" I asked her. "What place would be better for us than this? Who wants us outside? The world is full of terrible people. I wonder sometimes." She was very serious for a minute, and then she turned to me and smiled. "Don't you worry, my Mary Kat. Nothing bad will happen." That must have been just about the minute he found the entrance and started up the driveway, hurrying in the rain because I had only a minute or two left before I saw him. I might have used that minute or two for so many things. I might have warned Constance somehow, or I might have thought of a new, safer magic word, or I might have pushed the table across the kitchen doorway. As it happened, I played with my spoon and looked at Jonas, and when Constance shivered, I said, "I'll get your sweater for you." That was what brought me into the hall as he was coming up the steps. I saw him through the dining room window, and for a minute, chilled. I could not breathe. I knew the front door was locked. I thought of that first. "Constance," I said softly, not moving. "There's one outside. The kitchen door. Quickly." I thought she had heard me because I heard her move in the kitchen, but Uncle Julian had called at that moment, and she went into him, leaving the heart of our house unguarded. I ran to the front door and leaned against it and heard his steps outside. He knocked, quietly at first, and then firmly, and I leaned against the door, feeling the knocks hit at me, knowing how close he was. I already knew that he was one of the bad ones. I had seen his face briefly, and he was one of the bad ones, who go around and around the house trying to get in, looking in the windows, pulling and poking and stealing souvenirs. He knocked again, and then called out, "Constance, Constance." Well, they always knew her name. They knew her name and Uncle Julian's name, and how she wore her hair and the color of the 3 dresses she had to wear in court, and how old she was, and how she talked and moved, and when they looked in her face to see if she was crying. I want to talk to Constance, he said outside, the way they always did. It had been a long time since any of them came, but I had not forgotten how they made me feel. At first, they were always there, waiting for Constance, just wanting to see her. "Look," they said, nudging each other and pointing. "There she is, that one, that's the one, Constance." "Doesn't look like a murderess, does she?" they told each other. "Listen, if you can get a picture of her when she shows again." "Let's just take some of these flowers," they said comfortably to each other. "Get a rock or something out of the garden. We can take it home to show the kids." "Constance," he said outside. "Constance." He knocked again. "I want to talk to Constance," he said. "I have something important to say to her." They always had something important they wanted to tell Constance, whether they were pushing at the door or yelling outside or calling on the telephone or writing the terrible, terrible letters. Sometimes they wanted Julian Blackwood, but they never asked for me. I'd been sent to bed without any supper. I had not been allowed in the courtroom. No one had taken my picture. While they were looking at Constance in the courtroom, I had been lying on the cot at the orphanage, staring at the ceiling, wishing they were all dead, waiting for Constance to come and take me home. "Constance, can you hear me?" he called outside. "Please, listen for just a minute." I wondered if he could hear me breathing on the inside of the door. I knew what he would do next. First, he would back away from the house, sheltering his eyes from the rain, and look up at the windows upstairs, hoping to see a face looking down. Then he would start toward the side of the house, following the walk, which was only supposed to be used by Constance and me. When he found the side door, which we never opened, he would knock there, calling Constance. Sometimes they went away when no one answered at either the front door or the side. The ones who were faintly embarrassed at being here at all and wished they had not bothered to come in the first place because there was nothing really to see and they could have saved their time or gone somewhere else. They usually hurried off when they found they were not going to get in to see Constance. But the stubborn ones, the ones I wished would die and lie there dead on the driveway, went around and around the house, trying every door and tapping on the windows. "We got a right to see her," they used to shout. "She killed all those people, didn't she?" They drove cars up to the steps and parked there. Most of them locked their cars carefully, making sure all the windows were shut before they came to pound at the house and called Constance. They had picnics on the lawn and took pictures of each other standing in front of the house and let their dogs run in the garden. They wrote their names on the walls and on the front door. "Look," he said outside, "you've got to let me in." I heard him go down the steps and knew he was looking up. The windows were all locked. The side door was locked. I knew better than to try to look out through the narrow glass panels on either side of the door. They always noticed even the slightest movement. And if I had even barely touched the dining room drapes, he would have been running at the house shouting, "There she is, there she is." I leaned against the front door and thought about opening it and finding him dead on the driveway. He was looking up at a blank face of a house, looking down because we always kept the shades drawn on the upstairs windows. He would get no answer there, and I had to find Constance a sweater before she shivered any more. It was safe to go upstairs, but I wanted to be back with Constance while he was waiting outside. So I ran upstairs and snatched a sweater from the chair in Constance's room and ran downstairs and down the hall into the kitchen. And he was sitting at the table in my chair. I had 3 magic words.
I said, holding the sweater. Their names were Melody, Gloucester, Pegasus, and we were safe until they were said out loud. Mary Cat, Constance said. She turned and looked at me, smiling. It's our cousin, Charles Blackwood. I knew him at once. He looks like father. Well, Mary, he said. He stood up. He was taller now that he was inside, bigger and bigger as he came closer to me. Got a kiss for your cousin Charles? Behind the kitchen door was open wide. He was the first one who had ever gotten inside, and Constance had let him in. Constance stood up. She knew better than to touch me, but she said, Mary Cat, gently, and held out her arms to me. I was held tight, wound round with wire. I couldn't breathe, and I had to run. I threw the sweater on the floor and went out the door and down to the creek where I always went. Jonas found me after a while, and we lay there, together, protected from the rain by the trees crowding overhead, dim and rich in the kind of knowing, possessive way trees have of pressing together. I looked back at the trees and listened to the soft sound of the water. There was no cousin, no Charles Blackwood, no intruder inside. It was because the book had fallen from the tree. I had neglected to replace it at once, and our wall of safety had cracked. Tomorrow I would find some powerful thing and nail it to the tree. I fell asleep listening to Jonas, just as the shadows were coming down. Sometime during the night, Jonas left me to go hunting, and I woke a little when he came back, pressing against me to get warm. Jonas, I said, and he purred comfortably. When I woke up, the early morning mists were wandering lightly along the creek, curling around my face and touching me. I lay there, laughing, feeling the almost imaginary brush of the mist across my eyes, and looking up into the trees.